The studio lights beamed down with an almost blinding intensity, casting sharp reflections off the polished glass desk at the center of the Fox News set. The live audience, seated just off camera, murmured with the kind of restless anticipation that only comes when something big is about to happen. Tonight's segment wasn't supposed to be explosive, it was promoted as a balanced discussion on border policy, but everything changed when Jessica Tarlov decided to challenge Texas Governor Greg Abbott live on air. She entered the set first, confident and prepared, a stack of notes in her hands and a faint smile on her face. She had already made headlines earlier in the week for calling Abbott's border strategy inhumane and tone-deaf. And now, here he was, in the same studio, sitting directly across from her. Abbott rolled calmly into frame, adjusting his jacket with the steady composure of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. No papers. No notes. Just that quiet Texas confidence that made his supporters believe he could hold the line against anybody. The host barely finished the introduction before Jessica leaned forward and struck. "Governor Abbott," she said sharply, "you claim your border policy protects Texans, but the reality is that families are being ripped apart and innocent people are suffering. How can you sit there and defend policies that have caused so much pain to so many?" A few people in the studio audience murmured, "Wow," and even the host raised his brows at how direct the opening attack was. Abbott didn't move. He simply folded his hands on the desk and stared at her with calm, unwavering focus. "Jessica," he replied in a low, steady drawl, "you sit in a New York studio and call it cruelty. Texans call it survival." The room fell silent. It wasn't just a reply, it was a warning shot. And everyone watching knew they were no longer in a balanced discussion, they were in the opening seconds of a fight. Jessica didn't flinch, at least not visibly. She leaned in, her tone sharpening even more. "Survival? Governor, families with young children are being detained for weeks in facilities that your own state officials have called unprepared and understaffed. That's not survival, that's cruelty. And frankly, it's embarrassing to the rest of the country." A faint of agreement echoed from somewhere in the audience. Jessica sensed momentum and pressed harder. "You talk about Texas values, but Texas also values compassion. Or have you forgotten that part?" Abbott inhaled slowly, not out of frustration, but as if giving her time to finish digging her own hole. Then he turned slightly toward her, voice still calm but carrying an unmistakable edge. "Jessica, the difference between you and me is that I've actually stood on the Texas border at 2 in the morning, talking to exhausted sheriffs who haven't seen their families in days. I don't read about these issues from a studio. I live them. And compassion doesn't mean letting chaos pour through your front door." The studio audience erupted with applause and a few surprised laughs. Jessica blinked, just for a second, and the camera caught it. She tried to regain her footing. "No one is suggesting we allow chaos. I'm talking about basic human decency." Abbott cut in, not raising his voice, but tightening the tone just enough to slice through her sentence. "Decency is what drives our law enforcement to protect Texas families when Washington won't. Decency is what makes a rancher in Del Rio offer water to an officer standing guard in 108-degree heat. Decency isn't a speech. It's action. Something a lot of people in New York commentating from the sidelines seem to forget." The audience clapped even louder this time, not the polite kind of applause, but the energized kind that builds momentum. Abbott didn't even turn to acknowledge it. His eyes stayed on Jessica, calm and steady. And in that moment, it was clear, she fired the first shot, but he landed the first hit. Jessica straightened her shoulders, clearly surprised by the strength of the audience reaction. Still, she wasn't ready to back down. She flipped a page in her notes and tried to regain control of the narrative. "Governor, you keep talking about sheriffs and ranchers, but what about the thousands of innocent migrants who are fleeing violence and persecution? Don't they deserve the same level of protection and dignity?" Abbott leaned back slightly, his hands clasped together on the desk, more relaxed now, as if he knew she was walking right into his next point. "They absolutely do," Abbott replied calmly. "And that's why we've spent millions of dollars providing resources to process asylum claims legally. But there's a difference between helping those in need and opening the door so wide that the cartels walk in right behind them." The audience hummed with approval, nodding visibly on camera. Jessica opened her mouth to challenge that, but Abbott wasn't finished. "And let me remind you, every family in Texas has the right to feel safe in their own home. When your border is being overrun and Washington refuses to act, protecting your people isn't an option, it's a duty." A low but strong applause rolled across the studio. Even the host, who had been carefully neutral, glanced at Jessica as if to say your move. Jessica hesitated, just for half a heartbeat, and the room felt it. She shifted in her chair, flipping her notes again as if a better argument might be hiding on the next page. But before she could speak, Abbott leaned forward and delivered the line that silenced the entire room. "You talk about dignity, Jessica. Dignity also means defending your own citizens when no one else will." The room went quiet, and then exploded into applause. Jessica looked down. She didn't say a word. And in that moment, the momentum of the entire debate shifted, live, on national television, in favor of Greg Abbott. The applause finally died down, but the energy in the studio had completely changed. Jessica tried to reset the tone by turning to the host for support, but even he looked slightly taken aback by how decisively Abbott had taken control of the conversation. "Governor," she tried again, voice tighter now, "you say Washington refuses to act, but it's states like yours that constantly block reform in Congress. You can't complain about federal inaction when you're part of the reason nothing gets done." A few polite claps came from the back of the room, but the punch lacked the conviction it might have had 10 minutes earlier. Abbott turned to her with a look that seemed almost sympathetic, the kind of look you give someone who doesn't realize they've already lost the argument. "Jessica, Congress doesn't need more speeches and headlines. It needs courage. Texas asked for help, Washington delayed. Texas built solutions, Washington criticized. If you think that's leadership, you've been in D.C. too long." A ripple of applause ran through the crowd again. Someone actually shouted, "Tell her, Governor," from off-camera. Jessica exhaled, clearly frustrated, and tried one final push. "So your solution is just to ignore the federal government and do whatever you want?" Abbott didn't hesitate for a second. "No. My solution is to protect Texans first, and deal with Washington's lectures later." The crowd leapt to its feet, a spontaneous standing ovation that the producers hadn't planned for. Even through the applause, Abbott kept his eyes locked on Jessica. Calm. Steady. Unshaken. And that was the moment everyone in the studio, and everyone watching at home, realized the debate wasn't even a debate anymore. It was a public lesson. And Jessica Tarlov was on the receiving end of it. The studio floor still echoed with the sound of that standing ovation when the host tried to get things under control again. He glanced over at Jessica, almost as if giving her a silent opportunity to regroup, but her shoulders were tense, and the stack of prepared notes in front of her suddenly looked useless. Still, she forced a tight smile and leaned forward. "Governor Abbott, you keep talking about Texas as if it exists in a bubble. But this is the United States. We're supposed to work together. You acting alone on the border is reckless." Abbott cut in, not with anger, but with a calm decisiveness that made everyone lean in closer. "Reckless," he repeated quietly. "You think protecting the people who elected me is reckless?" The room went silent again. Abbott shifted slightly in his chair, placing both hands on the desk in front of him. "Let me tell you what reckless looks like, Jessica. Reckless is sitting in a TV studio and lecturing Texans about compassion while they're being threatened on their own land. Reckless is ignoring sheriffs who've begged for help because it doesn't fit a political narrative. Reckless is pretending the border crisis is theoretical when people are living it every single day." Jessica blinked, lips parting slightly, but there was nothing to say. Abbott's voice never rose, yet each sentence landed like a hammer. So yes, he continued, if choosing Texas over Washington makes me reckless, then I'll proudly be reckless every single day of the week. That was it. The crowd exploded again, louder than ever before. The cameras shook. The host gave up trying to interrupt. And Jessica Tarlov, still sitting across from him, lowered her eyes, the fight completely drained from her posture. On live television, she had been completely destroyed. The show cut to commercial just as the audience broke into another round of thunderous applause. But behind the scenes, the tension didn't fade. Cameras swiveled away, studio lights dimmed slightly, and staff rushed onto the set to reset props. Jessica Tarlov remained in her seat for a moment, staring down at her notes, the edges slightly crumpled from how tightly she'd been gripping them. Abbott calmly rolled back from the desk and shook hands with the host, who leaned in and whispered, almost apologetically, "You definitely owned that segment, Governor." Abbott offered a polite nod, but didn't gloat. Instead, he turned toward Jessica. "Nothing personal," he said quietly. "But when it comes to Texas, I don't hold back." Jessica forced a stiff smile but didn't respond. Her producer appeared at her side almost instantly, speaking in a low, urgent tone. "We'll spin it, Jessica. Say it turned into grandstanding. We'll say he refused to talk policy." She didn't seem convinced. Meanwhile, on the other side of the set, Abbott's communications director stepped in with a phone in hand. "Governor, trending in less than 5 minutes. Hashtag Team Abbott is everywhere. Our clips are exploding on Twitter and TikTok." Abbott nodded once. "Good. That means Texans are watching." A young production assistant walked by and quietly said, "Sir, my dad's a border agent. He texted me during the segment and said, 'Finally someone said it.' He told me to thank you." Abbott gave a small nod, the kind he reserved for moments that actually mattered. "Tell him the fight's not over," he replied. And with that, Greg Abbott exited the studio, not as a guest who survived a debate, but as a man who had just turned a live television segment into a defining moment. By the time Greg Abbott stepped out of the studio and into the brisk night air, the internet was on fire. Clips of the confrontation were already dominating timelines. One 10-second moment, where Abbott leaned in and said, "Then I'll proudly be reckless every single day of the week," had already been clipped, subtitled, and reposted with captions like, "The Texas Hammer just dropped." TikTok users were remixing the exchange into highlight reels. Twitter threads were breaking down the moment frame by frame. On YouTube, the show's official channel had posted the full segment, but unofficial versions with bold titles like "Abbott Destroys Jessica Tarlov" were already pulling in hundreds of thousands of views in real time. And the comments? Unrelenting. "He didn't just win, he humiliated her. This is how you speak for your state. Respect." Jessica Tarlov's PR team had gone into damage control mode, firing off tweets accusing Abbott of being aggressive, unwilling to have a civil dialogue, and grandstanding for clicks. But it only made things worse. Because people had watched it live. And they weren't buying it. Meanwhile, Abbott's team was riding the wave. Social media accounts blasted out clean-cut quotes, clips, and commentary. "Texas deserves a voice that won't back down." Greg Abbott just reminded everyone who that is. The hashtag Don't Mess with Texas surged to the top of trending lists, not as a campaign slogan, but as a national warning. In Texas, local news stations began airing replays with anchors describing the moment as one of the most lopsided live debates in recent memory. And Abbott? He simply got into his SUV, looked at his team, and said, "Now, let's talk about border security tomorrow. We're just getting started." By sunrise the next morning, the ripple effect had turned into a national wave. Major news outlets couldn't ignore the clip anymore, even the ones usually critical of Abbott. CNN ran a headline that read, "Tarlov caught off guard in heated exchange with Texas Governor," while Fox News simply called it Abbott's viral knockout. Across radio and podcast platforms, pundits were dissecting the confrontation like analysts reviewing a championship fight. Some called it strategic brilliance. Others admitted, begrudgingly, that Abbott had simply been too prepared, too grounded and too Texas for Jessica to handle. In coffee shops from Houston to Abilene, people replayed the moment on their phones, shaking their heads with small smiles. "He said exactly what we've been screaming at the TV for years," one veteran told his buddy as they sipped coffee at a roadside diner. "About time someone pushed back," the other replied. Even outside of Texas, conservatives shared the clip with captions like, "This is how you defend your people. Other governors should take notes." For Jessica, the morning was much colder. People who the day before had praised her confidence and poise, were now questioning why she walked into that conversation with loaded talking points and no backup plan. Her phone buzzed non-stop, texts, calls, emails, most of them asking one version of the same question: what happened out there? Meanwhile, Abbott's own phone vibrated with messages from sheriffs, ranchers, and even U.S. senators. "We saw it. Well done. Keep going." As he stepped into his office at the Texas Capitol, one of his aides handed him the latest poll numbers. Overnight approval ratings, up. National support, up. Engagement, through the roof. Abbott glanced at the paper, gave a small nod, and placed it face down on his desk. "All right," he said. "Let's get back to work." Because for Greg Abbott, the TV moment was over. The real fight, the Texas fight, was just beginning. Inside the governor's strategy room, maps of Texas lit up the digital display wall. Counties, border sectors, and polling breakouts flashed in real time. Abbott's senior advisors gathered around the table, energized, not by celebration, but by opportunity. "Governor," one advisor said, tapping the screen, "you didn't just hit Tarlov. You shifted the entire national narrative. People outside Texas are suddenly listening." Abbott paused, arms folded, eyes scanning the data. The room was quiet, focused, the way it always was when he was planning his next step. Another advisor spoke up. "We should launch a follow-up campaign. Short-form videos. Clips of ranchers, sheriffs, border agents telling their stories. Connect the live TV moment to the real world." Another slid a folder across the table. "And schedule a border visit this weekend. Let the cameras follow. Let America see the people you were talking about." Abbott flipped the folder open, nodding slightly. His chief of staff leaned in. "Governor, Jessica Tarlov's team is already trying to change the headline. If we move now, they won't have time to reframe it. We'll lock it in." Abbott looked up, his voice calm but firm. "Then we move now. Line up the sheriff in Maverick County, the rancher from Del Rio, and the officer from Eagle Pass. We're not just responding, we're defining." A quiet, "Yes sir," followed. Outside the glass walls of the office, staffers moved quickly, phones ringing, clip packages being edited, media requests coming in non-stop. It looked less like a government office and more like a command center. And Abbott, standing at the head of the table, closed the folder and set his hand on it as if sealing the mission. "They wanted a fight on TV," he said. "Now they're getting one in real life." Just 48 hours after the viral broadcast, Greg Abbott stood beneath an open-air tent on the edge of the Texas border. Hundreds of people lined the perimeter, ranchers in dusty boots, law enforcement officers in uniform, families wrapped in Texas flags. The sun burned hot overhead, but nobody moved. They were waiting. Abbott stepped up to the portable podium without notes. Cameras from every major news outlet were pointed his way. The noise died instantly as he began to speak. 2 nights ago, I was asked why Texas acts when Washington sits on its hands. The answer is simple: we don't wait for permission to defend our people. Applause rolled across the crowd, strong, determined. Abbott continued, voice firm, eyes locked on the very land behind him. Some people say what we're doing is reckless. That's fine. I'd rather be reckless in defense of Texans than be polite while our communities suffer. The line hit like a thunderclap. Several people in the crowd shouted, Amen, while others raised their hats high into the air. Abbott turned slightly, pointing toward the river behind him. This isn't about headlines. It's about this ground. These families. This state. And let me be very clear, if anyone in Washington thinks a viral tweet or studio script is going to intimidate Texas, I've got news for them. Texas isn't backing down. The crowd erupted. Flags waved. Boots stamped on dry earth. In every direction, phones went up, capturing the moment. We didn't ask for this fight, Abbott said, his voice rising above the cheers, but we will finish it. Because Jessica Tarlov might have spoken at us on live TV, but today, Texas speaks for itself. With that, Abbott stepped back from the podium, raising one hand in a simple gesture of acknowledgement. The roar that followed wasn't just support, it was a rallying cry. And somewhere far away, in a studio in New York, Jessica Tarlov watched the scene unfold on her monitor, and realized the broadcast she thought would embarrass Greg Abbott had only made him stronger. And in the end, this wasn't just a debate, it was a reminder. A reminder that Texas doesn't break under pressure. That a governor who knows his people will never bow to a talking point. That loud voices on television mean nothing when they're up against real experience. Jessica Tarlov tried to embarrass Greg Abbott in front of the nation. But what she didn't realize is that Texans don't embarrass easily. They stand their ground. They protect their own. And when pushed, they rise. So to every politician watching from far away. And to everyone who thinks Texas will stay quiet the next time they attack its values. Remember this moment. Because Greg Abbott didn't just win a debate. He sent a message. Texas speaks for itself.